Have you noticed that every time a government wants to gain more control, they always claim it's for the greater good of society? And it doesn't matter if it's speech restrictions, lockdowns, or climate emergencies. This is not freedom. This is not classical liberalism. This is collectivism disguised as compassion. Just a few weeks ago, the provincial government of Nova Scotia said that they were going to fine people going for a hike in the woods of fines of up to $25,000. This is effectively suspending the mobility rights guaranteed under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. However, I'm also happy to report that in the weeks since the Nova Scotia announcement, there has been also follow-up announcements, mass non-compliance, just the conservation officers unable to write as many tickets as there are people walking in the woods. This is a good thing for freedom. Today I want to take this example and talk to you about classical liberalism and how it contrasts with government control. Essentially, classical liberalism is the opposite of modern liberalism. And we're going to draw upon three political authors, three giants in political thought, to help us illustrate and understand this idea of classical liberalism. We're going to draw on George Orwell, Friedrich Hayek, and Frederick Bastiat to help us understand this more. And we're going to do this in the context of contrasting and comparing those authors' thoughts with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, guaranteeing such things as the mobility that the provincial government of Nova Scotia is trying to suspend. I'm going to start with a premise to suggest that a right is not a right at all if it can be suspended. It is merely a permission. So let's start with the basics. Classical liberalism, the philosophy that built the free world. This was all about the dignity and freedom of the individual. The three central points were about your right to life, your right to liberty, and your right of private property with minimal state interference. Now, Frederick Bastiat, who wrote the laws, said it best. The purpose of the law is to protect life, liberty, and property, and nothing more. In other words, the law should stop murder, fraud, and theft. It should help you defend yourself against those who would harm you. But beyond that, government has no business running your life. Now, compare that with modern liberalism. Modern liberals don't defend individual liberty. In fact, they see individual liberty as a threat to their ideals. They build systems to control, they write regulations, and they build bureaucracies. And every single one of those three premises is based on building a system of control to make you behave in a certain way. Bottom line is, classical liberalism was about freedom, even if that meant an inequality of results. Modern liberalism is all about control, even if that destroys your freedom. Now, George Orwell warned us in his book, 1984, about this. He described a world where government just doesn't control your actions. It controls your thoughts. The truth was about whatever the party says it was, where freedom is slavery and obedience is survival. And if you look around today, isn't it obvious that we're seeing echoes of Orwell everywhere? Speech laws, online censorship bills, hate speech codes, and now a government that is literally telling you you cannot walk outside. Orwell wasn't writing a manual, he was writing a warning. And modern liberals are marching us right towards it. And then there's Nobel Prize winner F.A. Hayek, who wrote The Road to Serfdom. And in that book, he warned socialists that their central planning design leads to only one thing: servitude. It doesn't matter if you call it communism, socialism, democratic socialism, social democracy, or even liberal progressivism. Once government takes the power to plan your life, you are no longer free. Let's look at Canada today. Carbon taxes, which has just been recently replaced with industrial taxes, climate emergencies, central bank manipulation, and bureaucrats deciding whether you can walk in your own forest or not. This is not freedom. This is serfdom with a smiling face. Again, Bastiat put it plainly. The state is the great fiction where everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else. And that's exactly what modern liberalism has become. A constant attempt to redistribute wealth, control outcomes, and police behavior, always in the name of the greater good. But as history has shown us again and again, no good has ever come out of the greater good. So now let's bring this back into the Canadian context. Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We're told that this document guarantees us certain freedoms, such as the freedom of expression, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of mobility. But I ask the question, what good is a right if it could be suspended at the whim of a decision of a bureaucrat or politician? Rights are either objective and inalienable, or they are subjective and installed and removed based on the whims of the ideology at the time. During the pandemic, your mobility rights were suspended. Your right to worship was suspended, and your right to assemble was suspended. And now in Nova Scotia, those mobility rights, guaranteed under the Charter, supposedly, are being suspended again. And as I said before, if a right can be removed with a signature on a piece of paper, then it never was a right at all. It was a permission. And permissions are granted from masters to subjects, and not from a government who recognizes its citizens as free men and women, especially under the pretense of common law. And here's what Canadians have forgotten. The legal tradition in Canada is not that our rights come from a parliament who feels generous from time to time. Our rights are not dispensed from a well-meaning, altruistic prime minister. Our legal tradition is based on the rule of law and the supremacy of God, as it says in the preamble of the Charter. This is based on the loose framework of the English common law system, foundationally in Magna Carta, and before that, Mosaic law. You see, common law recognizes a very specific hierarchy: God above man, man above government. And the preamble in the Charter confirms that. Canada is founded on the principles based on the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Historically, governments were never instituted to grant rights. Governments in the past were instituted or constituted to preserve the natural rights that men already knew that existed. Therefore, our rights come from universal law or natural law. And it doesn't matter if we call this granted by God or granted by the universe. So the very moment that you accept that government is the provider of rights and that they can suspend them if necessary based on an emergency, then you've already given your rights away. And here's the real danger. Once you vote to suspend a right, it's very unlikely that you will be able to vote your way back into that right. You couldn't vote your way out of lockdowns. And you can't vote yourself out of a climate change emergency. Hayek warned us that this would happen. Bastiat warned us that this would happen. And Orwell warned us that this would happen. And yet modern liberalism cheers this on. They trust government more than they trust themselves. They confuse obedience with morality. And yet they are happily walking us all into chains, chasing some utopia. Modern liberalism has nothing to do with freedom. It is merely collectivism in disguise. Classical liberalism, those ideas that we talked about from Orwell, Hayek, and Bastiat, was all about securing the rights of private property, individual liberty, and protecting the individual. So in Canada, we have to now ask this question: has the Charter of Rights and Freedoms failed? Because a right that can be suspended is not a right. And a citizen who accepts suspended rights is not free. So here's my challenge to you. Stop being a subject. Stop obeying blindly. and start thinking like a free person again. Because every time you bow down to the greater good, you lose the only good that matters, your freedom. If you found this content to be helpful in your discovery of politics, history, economics, financial literacy, or philosophy, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more upcoming videos.